Hello and welcome to Religion and Life. I'm your host, Ozzie Ostwald. In many courses and textbooks that cover American history, literature, and religion, the voices of African Americans are often glossed over or even excluded entirely. When this happens, a significant part of the American experience is lost to hegemonic narratives that ignore subjugation and dominance in the social context. My guest today, Dr. Alonzo Smith, explores these often neglected voices through examination of African American narratives about resistance, trauma, identity, and joy. Welcome, Alonzo.
Thank you.
I cribbed that last phrase off of one of your syllabi, I think. So I had it in quotation marks there, but it was really well said.
I like it.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining me. Tell us a little about yourself. You're relatively new to Appalachian, and we're really happy to have you here. So.
Of course. Yeah. So originally, I descend from the Bahamas. That little island. Most people say it's just a little dot on the map. On the southern coast of Florida, and came over here. Got educated. Attended TCU, go Horned Frogs, and yeah, and taught some mostly African American literature classes here. Yeah, I've been here now for 2 years. This is I'm going into my third year, and so I do a lot of work on just said, narratives of resistance in the works of long 19th century mostly black male authors across the African diaspora, and with a view to really kind of interrogating, somehow disrupting and redefining notions and ways that they were kind of constructing their identity across the 18th and the 19th century, what scholars would generally say is the long 19th century.
Yeah, I've read some of your work, and it's really fascinating stuff. And we've had some really interesting conversations about religion and literature and the relationship there, and I might want to come back to that because you're getting ready to teach a class in that in the fall, I think.
I am.
Yeah, so might want to hear a little bit about that because that's of interest to me.
Yeah.
But before we do that, I wanted to talk about some of these enslaved people narratives that you write about and the role that you see they can play in helping us to reimagine American history and American literature. Because I do think they're often neglected and not brought into the discussion. So tell me about some of the works, the type of works that you're reading and analyzing that were produced by enslaved people.
Yeah. One of my key texts is Frederick Douglass, Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass. And I engage most often with his original text, that is the one that he produced before he got more of his voice, traveled to Ireland, etc., and then he renamed invariably some of his texts. So I engage with Frederick Douglass in the 19th century. There's also Venture Smith. Venture Smith was an enslaved individual in New York, Rhode Island, Connecticut, came over from this place called Dukandara, and if we look on the map, we wouldn't see it on the African map, because many say he was illiterate. He was dictating his story to a school teacher, Elisha Niles, and he was probably saying Dukandara, but on the map it's called Uangara. But the guy was a descendant of a king, and so when he comes over to Africa, when he comes over to the United States, he's able to amass considerable amounts of wealth. Um, Again, maybe sort of disrupting that notion that, black people during this time lack the ability um, to apply, complex concepts, right? Because they are brute beasts, etc. And so when I think of authors like Frederick Douglass, Harriet Jacobs, Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl, Venture Smith, narrative of the life of Venture Smith. We can also think of, even though he's pretty controversial, Olaude Equiano, right? There's a lot of scholarship going on now on whether Olaude Equiano was actually born in the United States, or was he actually born in Africa, like he said? And we have scholars who said that indeed he was born in South Carolina, and so everything that he says about the transatlantic chattel slavery and the journey from the Africa to the New World is essentially contrived, right? It's because he was never born in Africa, he was never enslaved there, and so it's contrived. So what do we do with that? But so yeah, those are some of the main authors that I look at in my works.
Yeah. Well, you wrote something that I found tremendously interesting. You suggested that, and I want you to speak to this a little bit, that the plantation became a kind of supernatural place.
Yeah.
And that it was in this context that a lot of this good writing came from. Explain that a little bit, what you mean by that as a kind of spatio-temporal sacred spot.
Yeah. And that is something that I really appreciated, and that came of my readings from Harriet Jacobs in particular. And, Harriet Jacobs is a North Carolinian, okay? Edenton, North Carolina, which is about 3 hours away from here. But she speaks in her text about, she uses the word, the unusual circumstances, right? Her amanuensis says in the text that many of the readers will wonder if an enslaved individual could write in such a beautiful, prosaic way, but then she comes along and she says her unique circumstances will essentially explicate this, will give more understanding about it. That led me to theorize about the plantation then, considering the advanced knowledge that the enslaved often had to engage with in order to resist slavery, in order to assert their humanity, in order to survive. They had to consider the plantation as this sort of supernatural space, this space where very sort of abnormal things went on. Jacobs spoke about the ghosts that would sort of haunt the enslaved. Douglass spoke also about the ghosts that would haunt the enslavers as well as the enslaved. And so the plantocracy is not just this oppressive, dark, vacuous space. It is also a place where unusual things happen, whether that is for good or whether that is for evil. So yeah, I became pretty intrigued with that. And I sort of saw this line running through all of the narratives where the plantation is looked upon as a very kind of, ethereal, supernatural sort of construct. that allows the enslaved to do things that maybe enslavers don't know about even themselves.
That's really a fascinating theory.
Yeah.
This idea that a place of subjugation, I guess, in order to survive in that situation, you transfer it into a place of paranormal activity,
Yeah.
supernatural activity.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So when I think about this kind of the intersection of religion and the plantation, I think about Christianity being introduced to enslaved individuals as a way of kind of bolstering dominance and subjugation, and a lot's been written about that.
Yes.
And we've discussed that. But you have another take on this, and you also see these Christianity not as an instrument of just subjugation, but also an instrument of resistance.
Yeah.
And you're seeing that coming out in some of these narratives. Could you say a little more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think about, again, going back to the foundational text, whether we're thinking about Jacobs, whether we're thinking about Douglas, whether we're thinking about John Jay, and many of these kind of like African diasporic authors, they're using the religious text, they're using the evangelical text to fight back, to speak back to these very sort of oppressive notions of subjugation. And we have, whether it is Zora Neale Hurston or even later writers who said that the Africans had a unique relationship with God. They understood him in a way that really defied explanation. They had this kind of insight. And so we would know that whether it is the idea of conjuring, right? Christianity, Africa being the birthplace of civilization, etc. We can certainly appreciate what she said in that, with the Africans having this sort of unique insight into authentic notions of Christianity and religion, but particularly Christianity. And so I see that resonating in texts like Frederick Douglass, when Douglass, in this very visceral way, speaks at the end of his text, actually the appendix, where he actually goes on to say, between the Christianity of this land, meaning North America, and the Christianity of Christ, one is, they're essentially so diametrically opposed to each other that to say that one is evil, i.e. the Christianity of Christ, is to say that the other is good, all right? So if you're saying that the enslaver's notion or model of Christianity is good, then the Christianity of Christ is evil. And he goes on to say that he doesn't have a problem with Christianity in and of itself. He has a problem with these enslavers who plunder homes, who rape women, who subjugate them, and then go on their pulpits and say, servants, you should obey your masters, right? For this is right, right? That's what he had a problem with. So yeah, he's using these ideas, his own knowledge, as well as some of my other authors, to again disrupt these notions of Christianity and give them ideas about what authentic Christianity really looks like.
Yeah. So the Christianity of the enslavers was errant and apostate.
Yes.
And it was used to try to hold on to power.
Yes.
And to subjugate.
Yeah.
But enslaved people, I mean, they also read about Moses, right? And and a kind of egalitarian ethic, and I'm assuming that's what you mean when you refer to the Christianity of Christ.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because and yeah. So we can think about Moses. We can think about the origins of, again, early Christianity, right? Going back to Moses, and the way that these enslaved people applied um, these understandings of what Christianity is about, really to construct their own identity and to fight back. You know about um, the fact that the enslavers would often, when we think about individuals, um, for example, like who many say is Uncle Tom, whom Harriet Beecher Stowe writes about, Reverend Josiah Henson, and they're using him to go around the plantations and preach to the enslaved, right? Josiah Henson, John Morant. John Morant was not an enslaved individual, but he was nevertheless encouraged to preach to the enslaved individual. But again, even though they're sort of acquiescing, it would seem, to enslaved people, they are conveying a model of Christianity which is different from that which the enslavers are expecting them to, kind of propagate among the plantation.
So I think you're implying, maybe you're saying it explicitly, that some of these narratives are using embedded narratives.
Yes.
That's using the structure of Christianity.
Yeah.
But without being explicit about it, or producing a different type
Yes.
of narrative.
Yeah.
John Michael Spencer wrote a book called Blues and Evil years ago, and I think the phrase he used was hidden transcripts.
Yes, I know it.
That the music allowed a message that was hidden and
Yes.
coded in such a way. So is that the sort of dynamic you're seeing here in this?
It is
Yeah.
hidden transcripts. I use the hidden transcripts notion. I've written some text, and it's called Infrapolitics, right? And it speaks to this hidden transcript that often working class and like enslaved people would use again to kind of resist hegemonic narratives, hegemonic institutions, calling it variations of, infrapolitics, because when we think of infra, that, sort of like a magnifying glass zoning in on its subjects, right? And so yeah, it's the same kind of idea here, that they're employing and deploying these hidden transcripts in order to deconstruct, very sort of oppressive structures like the plantation.
Right.
Yeah.
So you also write about a kind of sermonic form genre called the Jeremiad, which is, I guess, a lament of sort and a prophetic type of sermon that was often used by enslaved individuals.
Yeah.
You mentioned, is it John Morant?
Yes, John
Okay.
Morant.
Is this the type of sermon he might have delivered, and how did that work in that context?
He, yeah, so the Jeremiad, whether we're talking about the lament, variation also of the Exodus, all right, Moses as well. But yeah, John Morant was one, I think, who exemplified that beautifully, in that John Morant is a preacher. He was not an enslaved individual, born in the North, migrated to Georgia, Florida, etc., engaged with the indigenous Americans, and even to the point of him. I want to be careful here, but he attempted at least to convert the indigenous Americans to Christianity. Whether he was successful in that, we don't know, but I commend him for his bravery. But nevertheless, he preached to the enslaved on the plantation, again using the lament of the Jeremiah. These were individuals who wanted to learn the catechism, they wanted to learn the Bible, often really so that, in their opinion, they could be better Christians. The enslaved, though, the enslaver disallowed this because in teaching them the catechism and teaching them the truth of the Bible through the Jeremiah as a genre, they would also have to be made aware that they're humans, right? And if you're humans, you can't enslave your brother, right? As Christians, a Christian can't enslave another Christian. So obviously, this was opposed by the owners of the plantation during John Morant's time. John Morant, too, though, even when we're thinking about this idea of conjuring, too, many scholars believe that he was also using ideas from Africa in order to sort of complicate his sermon as he preached that to the enslaved. Yeah.
There's something cathartic about that type of lament and prophetic utterance, I think.
Yeah. And we also see a little bit of that. Yeah, John Morant, who was introduced to Christianity through George Whitefield from the Great Awakening.
And that's fascinating,
Yes.
by the way. That really struck me.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I was just trying to picture that because that was a fascinating moment in history that I had not read or heard about till I was reading your article.
Yeah. But he's using these notions of the spirit, if we want to call it conjuring, the gifts, charismata. I was raised largely in a Pentecostal church, and when black people are having the spirit, they're really expressive, right? And so he's using these same kinds of conjuring to teach Africans in America. They weren't called African Americans yet, but to teach Africans in America, again, authentic notions of Christianity. So this sort of syncretic experience of Christianity, African notions combined with American or Western notions, producing something which is beautiful, right? And really complicates this idea of America being responsible for civilizing the enslaved, but also introducing them to this Judeo-Christian God. Yeah.
Yeah, I like the way you describe the syncretic character of what comes out of, I guess, some of the West African traditions, this personalized God that you're talking about, notions about spirits and conjure. And that, I guess, that opens up many people who are being introduced, enslaved people who are being introduced to Christianity, not only to Christianity, but to a certain type of Christianity. And the Great Awakening reference makes sense.
John Morant, he's being introduced. He speaks about the fact that George Whitefield comes to him, and whether George Whitefield is directly addressing him or not, the jury is still kind of out on that. But we know that he speaks to him in a very sort of confrontational way, and like, young man, this is the last day that you're going to be behaving this way. He goes out into the spirit. When he comes to, he goes home. His parents and his sister cannot understand him. But I think that begins something, sort of this movement, even from the early 18th century, which we see other black writers across the African diaspora building on in the 18th and 19th century. Them wanting to include religion. Jacobs says something in her text, Instance in the Life of a Slave Girl, after an enslaver, Dr. Flint or Dr. Norcom, who was a doctor here, and he and his other fellow ministers, Episcopalian ministers in particular, they're teaching them that they're not essentially human, right? Because they don't have a soul, etc. And they're sleeping with their enslaved, they're raping them, they're impregnating them, they're selling their babies down the river, and then on Sunday they're teaching Sunday school. And she says something very interesting. She says, after she listened, they pretended to essentially agree, and then she says, we left there and laughed at them, and then we went to the Methodist church where we could get a shout. Yeah, a shout as in, in the spirit.
Right.
So the Methodist church, I guess, was one who was a little bit more open to the enslaved and actually humanizing it. But nevertheless, to the point that, they're incorporating elements of African religion, black diasporic, biblical beliefs in order to, and blending that with American or Western notions in order to create something which is new, but also to resist and then redefine their own identity.
I had a graduate school professor, C.G. Newsom, who used to say that African American religious traditions were based upon West African traditions,
yes,
biblical Christianity, mixed together in the crucible of slavery.
There you go. Yeah, that was beautifully stated.
Well, this has been a delight having you here today. There's so much more I want to talk to you about, but we'll have to do that off the show here. Alonzo, thank you for joining me. I appreciate it.
Of course, Ozzy. Yeah, this has been amazing. I'd love to do this again. Yeah,
we'll do it again. Well, until next time, this is Ozzy Ostwalt, and I hope you'll join us again on Religion and Life here at App TV.